What does the future hold? Well, we can look into our crystal ball and we can definitely predict that there will be new issues in the upcoming years, relatively soon, on police liability. With change in technology and change in social issues, we can predict that there will be new law in new areas. And so we have to stay on top of all of this. The good news is that just because a new technology is being used doesn't mean that there is no laws that are applicable to it. For example, we know that police departments are going to be using drones and have started using drones, not only in surveillance but in day-to-day law enforcement techniques and patrols. Some states have started to pass individual statutes curtailing those uses by law enforcement. Florida is one of those states. In 2014, they passed a specific statute that limits the police and law enforcement's use of drones in certain circumstances only, such as hostage situations where they need a drone up there to film and record and as a tactical matter. But we can always reflect upon prior case law when dealing with these new issues of technology and how the law will evolve. We know the Fourth Amendment case law. We know what constitutes generally an unreasonable searches and seizures. So that law will be applied to drone use ultimately. The courts are always in a position, a delicate position, of balancing the public's interest in privacy and civil rights protections versus the need for adequate, if not aggressive, policing. So there's always a balance there. A big issue that we're going to have to deal with in 2015, 16, and 17, I would assume, is the militarization of police. It's been going on for many years, but it was highlighted in the Ferguson, Missouri riots. All of the live 24-hour footage circulated during the riots. At first, showed the Ferguson Police Department and the St. Louis County Police Department really overplaying their hand, aiming automatic rifles and heavy weapons at crowds. Again, this was not a military operation. This was not Iraq or Afghanistan. This was the United States. And there was no need for that heavy-handedness. The optics alone was crushing on those departments' legitimacy and then the ability to control a crowd. There are better ways. But anyway, a lot of equipment has flown from the federal government in the form of federal government Army surplus materials, tanks, weapons, heavy armor vehicles, Humvees. All of these have been sold or even given to police departments basically for free under a federal program. And police departments have snatched them up. They're hard to resist. The problem is that when you start to participate in a militarization type approach to crime fighting, strict liability theories come into play. Now, we talked about strict liabilities before. Remember, in our discussion about state torts, we talked about negligence, which is a non-intentional tort. Then we talked about intentional torts, assault, battery, and the plaintiff has to prove their case by preponderance of the evidence. And there's lots of defenses given to law enforcement agencies. However, strict liability, as we discussed at the beginning of the term, generally is not applicable to law enforcement agencies. Strict liability is another word for almost automatic liability. If you participate in highly dangerous or risky type ventures, then you're strictly liable, automatically liable if something goes wrong. Well, generally that doesn't apply to police departments and police work. And so third parties can't sue police departments under the theory of strict liability. They would love to because it's very easy to prove. It's almost like automatic liability theories. And they can recover very quickly and easily in court. But now, if the police do participate in military-type tactics and something goes wrong, strict liability theories are going to start rearing their heads in the court system. Keep in mind, our police department is paramilitary in nature, or it should be paramilitary in nature, our law enforcement agencies. And so that's a legal liability that is going to have to be addressed. Law enforcement agencies are going to have to realize that if they go down the path of militarization, they're going to open themselves up to more claims under the very pro-plaintiff type theory called strict liability or automatic liability. New social issues have arisen this decade and will have to be addressed. In the next upcoming years, we see an attack on the traditional stop and frisk policy called Terry stops. We talked about Terry stops in a previous lecture. The United States Supreme Court actually authorized them and legitimized them. If there's a reasonable suspicion that an individual is committing a crime, about to commit a crime, or something is a foul is afoot, if you will, the police are allowed to stop, frisk down the individual for weapons for officer safety purposes, and then commence a discussion. Well, in New York and some other urban areas, there's been an attack, an allegation, if you will. Allegations that the police department are misusing Terry stops. They are profiling certain minorities and then making Terry stops only on them. If there is a change in this area of law, it won't come from the court system. It'll come from the legislature, because the Supreme Court actually crafted and created Terry stops through the famous case that we discussed. Legalization of marijuana and maybe other types of drugs. We're starting to see a trend here throughout the United States on a state level. Federally, we still have marijuana as a Schedule A drug. However, the states are allowed, at least under the Obama administration, to pass individual statutes decriminalizing personal use of marijuana. And I do believe we're up to, let's see, I think almost 5 states now. We have Alaska, Oregon, Washington, Colorado. We have Washington, D.C., and we have some others on the ballot in 2016. And it seems like there's a trend going on. Medical marijuana definitely is trending, meaning legalizing medical marijuana, which makes sense with a prescription. That seems logical. But we're talking about private use of marijuana, the legalization of that. And it seems like the war on drugs has gone so wrong and really has not garnered the results that 40 years worth of law enforcement has been built around. Drug use is still prevalent. Drugs are still coming into our country. We've spent billions of dollars on the war of drugs, and it's seen as generally ineffective. And so it seems like a new approach is catching root, if you will, or growing roots, is the legalization, at least, of personal use of marijuana. And we'll see how that occurs, but obviously that's going to be a major impact on law enforcement and law enforcement issues. Body cameras. We talked about body cameras. It seems like, again, after a series of allegations of abuse of force by officers in 2014 and 15, and with Ferguson riots, there is a strong movement towards requiring, ultimately, law enforcement agencies to use body cameras. And I had mentioned in a previous lecture the philosophy of resistance is futile, meaning like Star Trek, the Borg. Police departments that resist this new technology and the new and really the community's wishes on this issue will probably be on the short stick. Will draw the short stick and on the and it's going to have to, adopt these policies eventually. So you might as well craft them and work with the various stakeholders to create something that you can live with. But body cameras are coming to a police department near you. Miami-Dade has already started to uh, fund their program for mandatory body cameras wearing. Key West as well. So in South Florida, it's already starting. Broward County, the sheriff of Broward County, is already looking into these and forming a committee to evaluate from a financial aspect, from an operational aspect, what do the stakeholders and the citizens of the county truly want. But the use of body cameras is coming, and they're going to bring up privacy issues. When will the filming begin? When will the filming end? Will people who are filmed have rights to keep their private affairs out of public records? These are all legal issues that will be rearing their heads ultimately. But law enforcement agencies should get prepared, start forming and thinking about standard operating procedures dealing with this new technology and strong rules of enforcement. So that way there is no turning off of cameras by law enforcement agents or police officers or deputies when they shouldn't turn it off. And they should turn it off in certain circumstances, like going into someone's house. That's a privacy issue on a domestic call, domestic battery, if you will. That's problematic because the family is now going to be featured on a film, and it's public record, and that's surely not something that they would prefer to occur. Another change in operating procedures is the active shooter response. We see these horror stories playing out on TV of lone wolf gunmen or a couple gunmen who storm a mall or a school or a theater. It used to be the policy of containment. In other words, the police would arrive at the scene, try to contain the threat until more backup units could arrive. Now there's a change in the standard. It seems like the general standard is changing to an aggressive response. Immediately upon arrival, try to neutralize the threat. Go in, confront, attack, advance upon the active shooter. So as these policies change, they set up new legal duties out there that the courts will contemplate in future cases. If the trend is to be more aggressive rather than containment type philosophies, the courts are going to hold police departments to this new standard of aggressively attacking active shooters. Don't wait. Go in. Neutralize the threat as quick as possible to save lives. So we'll see, but you always have to remember that the changes in policies could change that legal duty standard, the reasonableness standard in the industry or profession in which all cases are analyzed under. Schoolhouse jailhouse programs. I know in Broward County this is a big thing, and they're becoming more and more popular. The problem that has been highlighted is that juveniles in grade school and high school are going to prison at major rates just because of activities on campus, like a schoolhouse fight, or maybe a juvenile takes the cell phone of another juvenile, or small possessions of marijuana. When an arrest occurs on a juvenile, there's a record. It could actually ruin the life of the juvenile because they can't get future employment. They can't become judges, astronauts, teachers, scientists because of these prior convictions. Could ruin their life. So there is now a social movement out there, and it's very strong in Broward County, in which the stakeholders, the various groups in the community, as well as the schools, they're uniting, trying to get local law enforcement to agree that should there be an event on campus, a non-violent misdemeanor event, arrest won't occur. The children will be referred to the principal's office, and the school disciplinary matrix will kick in rather than an arrest and the juvenile is brought to juvenile court and entered into the criminal justice system. There's perceptions that this new program of thought will end the schoolhouse jailhouse pipeline, which primarily affects minority groups. In Broward County, I know that the various community groups and a chief of police of the largest city in Broward, Fort Lauderdale Police Department, as well as our sheriff, the state attorney, the judges, chief judge, the public defender, the Department of Corrections, have all entered an agreement, a formal agreement, saying that the officer reserves their right for discretion, but they're going to defer generally to the school disciplinary process. What's important is that when agencies are confronted with these programs in writing, because usually you have to sign an agreement, you should make sure you reserve the officer's discretion. And we did in two places, actually, in that agreement, because I helped draft the agreement between all the parties. And as long as the officer's discretion is reserved to either make an arrest or defer the juvenile to the school disciplinary process, then that's perfectly fine, because that's what happens in reality anyway. The officers are deputies, the school resource officers or the school resource deputies. They have discretion to make an arrest or not. Again, this all applies to non-violent misdemeanors. Reality shows, that always seems to be a thorn in the side of police departments. Some police departments fully embrace them because they see that as a source of revenue or popularity, or elected officials want to get on TV, and so they want their department featured on these things to get good PR. So there's a lot of momentum for these reality shows. The public loves these shows, whether it's a 48-hour investigation or Cops being the ride-along type reality program. It's all very interesting, of course, but it's a constant area of liability for police agencies, because if those officers who participate in this program don't sign waivers, you can't use their image or likeness without their permission. I mean, there are some implied consent theories that they knew it was going on, and so thus they allowed it, so therefore they waived their right. But let me tell you, I guarantee you that officers change their mind, deputies change their mind, and they very well may want compensation later. Or they may say, no, I didn't give permission. So you have to get waivers. And they can always revoke their permission down the road also at a later date, and that's problematic. Individuals who are arrested and filmed, there's violation of privacy issues, especially if it's just a minor arrest. Or if the individual was arrested but there was no probable cause, but it was totally filmed and played out on TV, that's a big problem. That could be a source of a tort claim against the police department. Public defenders and other criminal defense attorneys have taken the position that law enforcement officers who participate in these particular programs and make an arrest of their client, they argue that they're overzealous. This is sensationalism. They only made the arrest because they were on TV. They wanted a good show, if you will. Whereas they probably would have exercised their discretion and not made an arrest and let the individual go with a warning sometimes. So these are all problems with these types of shows and legal concerns that internal law advisors of police departments are always worried about. If it was up to me, which it's not, but if it's up to me, I would say no. No reality TV shows. Either you're a cop or you're an actor. It's one of the two. but it's not both. Pick your profession. That's what I would tell the workforce. And I would tell agencies, don't do these things, because in the long run, it actually hurts your department's reputation. In the long run, it doesn't generate any funds to cover the costs and the damage of the reputation that the agency could suffer if there's just one misshooting caught on TV while they're filming, or if somebody gets hurt, or if waivers are not completed, or if privacy issues rear their heads. There's violations of privacy or misappropriation of likeness torts. So to me, it's simple. Cut and dry. Don't participate in these programs. Don't commercialize your department and your law enforcement agency. But with that said, it's not up to me, and generally a lot of agencies do participate in these. New technologies. There's legal issues surrounding license plate readers and cell phone locators. License plate readers are on the rise. It's technology where law enforcement agencies can collect all of these license plates, either through a toll booth or even in a parking lot. They can have mounted recorders in units and collecting all the pictures of the license plate, and software reads these pictures and immediately shoots out if there's a match as to a stolen vehicle or a vehicle on a list or expired tags. And that's okay, it seems, if this was on the location, meaning right away a ticket is issued. But generally, what happens is all these license plates are stored in a giant database for years, and then agencies go in and mine the data, find out who was where and when, if they have to investigate a suspect. Generally, that was acceptable. Generally, that was allowable. But now we're starting to see different states pass statutes that restrict this ability in the way of limiting the storage of this information for a certain period of time, and then it has to be dumped. In Florida, we have a statute that has been passed in 2014 that limits the collection of this data up to 3 years. Actually, the statute defers to the administrative agency, the applicable administrative agencies, to create a regulation, and they did. They announced a regulation in early 2015, which basically says you have to dump this data after 3 years, unless it's being safe for an active criminal prosecution. So in this area, license plate readers, there is some liability. If you fail to do the data dump in time, you could be charged with violating the law, or privacy issues creep up, and you may have to face them in court. So keep that in mind. Now, of course, this only applies if your agency is hosting the data. A lot of this data is actually owned by and held by private companies, and then they sell the database, or they sell access to the database to law enforcement agencies. In that case, it's not the law enforcement agency that's keeping the data. The law enforcement agency may be buying access to the information, but they're not necessarily keeping it. So that is going to be a loophole or an issue that the courts are ultimately going to have to address under these state-specific statutes. Cell phone pings. We have technology now that can find a cell phone relatively accurately based on the pings off the various cell towers. And we have different mechanisms, electronic recording, detection devices to detect where the cell phones are and to intercept phone calls. Now, courts have started to issue opinions on all this. And in fact, the Supreme Court jumped headfirst into the debate by issuing an opinion that generally you need a warrant for these types of searches. They consider them searches, unless there are exigent circumstances are involved. Federal courts have basically fallen in line along this particular theme. So we're starting to see the Fourth Amendment apply to the searches of cell phones, pings, and cell phone data. Now, there are exceptions, of course, national security exceptions under the Patriot Act. FISA courts get involved there in issuing the warrant. Exigent circumstances or possibility of loss of the data that requires the police to take immediate control of the device and preserve the data inside. But we'll see how this all plays out in the court system itself. Another social issue that's rearing its head is the immigration debate. It's spilling over into the law enforcement community. Many local law enforcement officers are caught between a rock and a hard place. Their agencies may or may not adopt policies that basically say, listen, we're not going to enforce federal law. We're not going to go out there and round up immigrants that are illegal in our jurisdiction. In fact, we're not even going to ask people about their status when called to a scene unless it's relevant. The reason why is because if you start to investigate illegal immigrant status on a state or local level, i.e. enforce federal law, you start to alienate a certain portion, and a good portion, of the community. Illegal aliens are going to go underground. They're going to be easy victims because they're not going to report crimes committed against them. They're not going to be helpful witnesses that you need in criminal cases. They're going to go underground. They're going to be reluctant witnesses. They're not going to cooperate with the police. And whenever you have that type of group in society, crime against them will go up. Your ability to solve crime and prevent crime will go down. So illegal immigration is a big issue, and the Supreme Court struck down just a portion of a Arizona state law which actually mandated that their local police departments could stop somebody just for the suspicion of being an illegal immigrant. In other words, the initial stop could be based on suspicion of illegal immigration. And that was held as unconstitutional. The Supreme Court said, no, 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 no. Federal government enforces immigration laws, not states, so you can't use that as the only reason for detaining an individual originally or pulling an individual over. It makes sense. Now, after the initial encounter, which is spawned by some reasonable suspicion, then you can delve into that if your agency prefers you to do so. What is the answer? Good question. This is a hot topic. But right now, generally, I find that most agencies in large urban areas are not getting involved in the immigration issue. They're only enforcing state and local laws. They're not getting involved in the status of an immigrant. Now, if a criminal is an illegal immigrant as well, there will be a hold placed on them by ICE, and the local police departments do enforce that and report these individuals, these arrestees, to ICE, which is perfectly fine because by then they are arrested. There is probable cause that they committed a crime, so it's not going to be used in a discriminatory manner. We saved the last big issue for the final end, privatization of police forces, and I will disclose my preference on this issue. I think it's a train wreck. I think that this is a bad idea. I'm big into privatization, but not into privatization of government power, such as police power or corrections powers. Privatization of prisons and police forces seem to be growing in popularity because they're able to allegedly efficiently carry out the tasks of law enforcement at a greater savings to the community or to the county or to the city. I don't personally believe that, but that seems like that is some of the arguments for this. Originally, they started off, and there seemed to have been a big, strong movement for them, but they have curtailed and tapered off. And that's good in my eyes, or in my mind. But there's still always this issue. Should we privatize a police force? I don't think that someone should be granted governmental powers such as police powers, but we will see. There are real concerns here. All right, well, that's kind of a wrap up of what I see in the crystal ball. I'm sure that there will be even more issues that I didn't even predict in the future, but I wanted to bring to your attention and highlight some of these issues that we see before us coming down the pike.